Okay, we got it. Good. Morning.
Morning.
Thank you for all coming out on this very chilly morning. Indeed, but we have some sun, which helps. Well, it's a good time to make soup if you like soup, and share your soup with friends and strangers and neighbors. And if you got a good recipe, let me know. Well, when I talk, I often like to do an initial check-in about nature, because that's what we are. We have grown out of the planet, but we tend to forget this in industrial civilization. And interesting, now there's the climate summit in Egypt, which possibly the most important topic of the day, and potentially the unifying theme of the species. Yeah, it has great potential. So a few years ago, I had a pine tree cut down, so it was shading my garden in the west side for about 2 hours. It's a good sized tree. And I don't like to cut trees down unless I have to, pretty much avoid it. But I'm a carpenter, so I contradict myself. But we need to build things. So I had this tree cut, but I wanted it cut about 40 feet above the ground so that we would create a habitat for woodpeckers and other species. So my friend was a tree climber feller. He dropped the top of the pine tree, and we let that just stay on the ground to decay. And then we had this beautiful 40-foot dead standing, what is often referred to as a snag in our culture, wood. So over the years, the woodpeckers indeed did move in, including all manner of insects and other birds and chipmunks and what have you. And then recently it just fell over. Fortunately, it didn't hit my neighbor's fence. And oh, that's amazing. And then last week I go out and there's a big stump there, and there are all these really large magical mushrooms. And I don't know their name. I know a few mushrooms, but they were just very stunning, and they grew out of the decay. And what's critical in forests is decay. And now you'll see in parks and so forth that the biologists and ecologists are educating society to, in part, you leave the dead, when they fall over, you just leave those to decompose. So that's quite interesting. Back in the 80s, there was a scientist that worked for the BLM. He was studying old growth forest ecology. He was like on the cutting edge of that in the Northwest, Chris Masser. So he would come through town and give talks and slideshows. And a lot of it was about old trees that fell over in the forest, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700-year-old trees. And he would study what happened with the life of these things for decades. He would study that with his graduate students. So it's quite fascinating, all the life forms and the mycelia, the moisture, and on and on and on. So he said he went to Germany and went to the forest there. And at the time, the way they were practicing forestry is it kept everything really tidy, as if it were a park. Well-meaning, but missing some of the key aspects of the ecology. And so now we're changing, and decay is positive. Okay, but what I'm here to talk about today is actually the Noble Eightfold Path. I'll read this little piece. When the Buddha was 80 years old, and about to pass away, a young man named Subhata came to see him. Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, thought it would be too exhausting for his master to see anyone. But the Buddha overheard Subhata's request and said, "Ananda, please invite him in." Even as he was dying, the Buddha was willing to give an interview. Subhata asked, "World-honored one, are the other religious teachers in Magaha and Koshala fully enlightened?" The Buddha knew he had only a short time to live, and that answering such a question would be a waste of precious moments. When you have an opportunity to ask a teacher about the Dharma, ask a question that can change your life. The Buddha replied, "Subhata, it is not important whether they are fully enlightened. The question is whether you want to liberate yourself. If you do, practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Wherever the Noble Eightfold Path is practiced, joy, peace, and insight are there." The Buddha offered the Eightfold Path in his first Dharma talk. He continued to teach the Eightfold Path for 45 years. And in his last Dharma talk, spoken to Subhata, he offered the Noble Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So that's the Noble Eightfold Path. Out here, there's a column as you enter this gate. There's a basalt column, and on it, there's a carving by a woman in town, Lisa Ponder, was a stone carver. I think she did that one with sandblasting. And there's an image of a foot there. I encourage you to check it out. And then in the center of that foot is a wheel, circle, with 8 spokes. So that's a symbol in Buddhism of the Eightfold Path. So you'll see that on book covers and so forth and so on. If you travel in Asia, you'll see lots of those images depending where you are. So there's that. And that foot is interesting because in the early days of Buddhism, there were no images of Buddha. It was discouraged. But the image that did show up was the image of a foot. And there's images of feet all over if you travel through Asia, large ones carved in stone and so forth and so on. So those are the earliest images, is the Buddha's foot. And what's interesting in India is, like, we shake hands, and depending, I don't know the culture that well, but when I was there, you touch, feet of your teacher. So different cultures, we use hands, they use feet. So the Eightfold Path, after the Buddha had his enlightening experience, awakening under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, he said, well, now what should I do? Just be silent, be a yogi in the forest? And he thought, well, I'll share my teachings, my realizations. And so the first turning of the wheel, we're taught, was in Sarnath. And that, I give some reference geographically, it's just about 6 miles outside of Varanasi, which is one of the most holy cities in India for the Hindu Vedic culture. And Buddha studied there, so we're told, in Varanasi. So interestingly enough, his first teachings were only about 6 miles from Varanasi in Sarnath. So that was where the first turning of the wheel. And what he initially taught was the 4 Noble Truths, which one of our teachers, Myobun, I don't see her today, she's teaching that. And also the 6 Paramitas, so the Noble Eightfold Path is actually somewhat in between the 4 Noble Truths and the 6 paramitas. So 4 Noble Truths, there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, there's the cessation of suffering, and there is the path from the cessation of suffering, thus the Noble Eightfold Path. And suffering, we're not talking about physical suffering, though that indeed is suffering, but more so psychological, spiritual suffering. And most of us have some experience in it. So the Buddha was not only a spiritual teacher in a sense, but an educator. He had deep insight into the human condition and felt like, I could help. I could offer something that would be of benefit. So he was an educator and a healer in the sense that he practiced medicine. He practiced Buddhist medicine in the sense of the teachings. So the Eightfold Path is medicine to transform your life into a more wholesome path and experience. Now, what interests me about Buddha in that time is the context. He didn't just pop out of anywhere in the sense that there were other spiritual teachers of his day. I mean, India was an amazing place at that time. And some of the great religions and spiritual teachings come from India. But Vedic culture, was old by that time. The Brahmins were the priests. And the Jain religion, there's a few million Jains in India still practicing the same practice. They were there. Mahavira, the founder, I think, was like a contemporary of Buddha. So there was a lot of energy going on then relative to spiritual teaching. So the Buddha was very much a part of that. He had teachers and practiced extensively, but he didn't quite agree with some of the teachings. And thus he went out, studied, practiced, sat under the Bodhi tree, had an awakening experience, and decided to come forth with a particular form of teaching that we call Buddhism. But it's very related to that culture of the time. And he integrated some of those teachings, such as karma. He agreed with karma, but he had a different take on it, in the sense is that karma was very relative to one's intention. If you did something but it was unintended or a mistake, that's one thing. But to intend it, or be unconscious but intend it, is another. And so those are some of the nuances of karma. And karma, you can study that. It gets more complex. It's a great topic. Now, some contemporary scholars that are very interested in Buddhism, they don't particularly like karma because it can't be quantified. However, if we pay close attention to our lives, we can see, indeed, if I say something unpleasant or do a certain act, generally speaking, it brings about unpleasant results. However, they still say, how do you measure karma? Because we're in a very scientific culture, which is fine. I like science, but you can't measure it. And you can't quantify reincarnation. How do you quantify reincarnation? And yet, that is a key. Those two things are key parts of Buddhism, but some people don't necessarily agree with them, which is fine. So the first noble truth, right view. Now they have this word right, people would have an issue with that, right, as opposed to wrong. And that's not quite what this is about. It's right is relative to engaging the wisdom within Buddhism, right view, a non-delusional condition, right view, coming from a more clear space. Thus, this morning we're all sitting zazen, and that is a direct encounter with your own condition that is very intimate. Only you know that, and you have that. So that's a great gift that we all have, and we all have access to it. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it anywhere. And so right view is not so much about being right or having a view. Thich Nhat Hanh said the best view is no view. So we'll put right view in context with no view and be a little more playful. Having said that, there is a view, there is a context, and there's appropriate ways of going about. And so the right view is more of a reference to prajna paramita, prajna wisdom, coming from a place of wisdom. And again, sitting zazen gives us direct conduit into engaging in that spirit. Right view is also related to the Four Noble Truths. So they preceded the Noble Eightfold Path. So having a deep understanding and questioning of there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, there is the cessation of suffering, and there is the path. And so the good news is that there is cessation. And so it's one thing to read about it, which is important, and we should do that. And it's another to engage and practice it directly. And so that's what we do here. So, welcome. That's what we do here with all the teachings. We engage it directly and question it. So it's often said, the Buddha said, don't take my word for it. These are the teachings. I'd like to share them. Go and practice them, and let's talk about if they've helped you. So that's fair. And so my experience in engaging these teachings for 18 years here is that they are very beneficial. They're real medicine. Also, one thing that occurred to me this morning was we live in a country where freedom of religion is in the Constitution, the First Amendment. So we can practice, people can't do this all over the world. We can practice our religion in this country freely. So ideally, if you're Jewish or Christian, or a Sikh, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist in America, you have the right to practice your religion. So I encourage the diversity. I love that diversity. Whenever I go by Christian churches, I do a little, wow, thank you. Jesus was the Buddha of the West. So we're fortunate. So we should defend that right in the U.S., that you should have freedom of religion. The right view. Second on the list is right intention. And these two combined are often put in the category, those two are in the realm of wisdom, right view, right intention. Right intention is, key. And a lot of times we're not aware of our intentions. That's why the beauty of studying a spiritual practice and meditating is you become more intimate with our very restless brains that have a tendency to continuously excrete thoughts. Mine does it all the time. Right intention is lovely because you can tune in with that and you go, well, what actually am I intending here? We don't often ask that. We get ourselves into fixes because we say or do things without quite being clear on our intentions frequently. Or maybe we are clear and our intentions are not wholesome. Thich Nhat Hanh often says that within every human being there are unwholesome seeds deep in our consciousness and wholesome seeds, everyone. And it's a matter of what one waters. Do you water the unwholesome seeds or do you water the wholesome seeds? And so we all have to make these choices. And this is in the realm of right intention, to be aware of that. And what helps in that practice is being present in the moment. And that's again where Zazen is training us to be present in the moment, whatever moment that is. If you're driving, which many of us do, and there's always people doing things that we don't quite like, or walking down the street, or waiting for the bus. Thich Nhat Hanh has a whole text just on walking, mindful walking. And he used to arrive at the airport like an hour earlier so he could just walk around the airport mindfully. People didn't watch him because he wasn't showing that he was doing that, but he did it subtly where he'd go around the airport and just mindfully walk and breathe. And of course, I've been in airports and I'm always going, oh my goodness, when am I going to get out of here? What's going on here? Why this big line? It's just like, and just mindfully be there. And so that's a good teaching wherever we are, at our work, traveling, waiting for the bus, in the gas station. Right view, right intention. Then there's the next three come into the realm of ethics: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Okay? So right speech, that's a particularly poignant one in the sense that most of us talk throughout the whole day that we're awake. And it was wonderful. Talking and language are exciting. But sometimes we tend to say things that are not helpful. And so right speech is good medicine to reflect on that and say, wow, for instance, if you listen to political debates in the news and so forth, oftentimes language is used very harmfully. You can disagree with someone, but it'd be nice to use appropriate speech, kind speech, right speech, helpful speech. Even if you disagree, that's fine. In our culture, we're tending to drift away from the right speech and using speech in a very unwholesome way at times, some people. And it would benefit us all to engage in right speech, whomever and wherever. And there's ways to do that, of course, and still disagree, but do so in a way that is helpful. So the Noble Eightfold Path is really classical Buddhism in the sense that the Theravadins in Sri Lanka and Thailand, or the Vajrayana, Tibet, and now northern India, or Zen in China and Japan, US, Europe, Mexico, Canada. The Eightfold Path is core to all Buddhism. So, because the different sects and paths have different practices. But the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are just everyone. That's the core of the teaching. And also, it gets broken down into a lot of categories. I'm just briefly touching on this, but depending what tradition you're from, right speech has like 5 aspects. Right view has this many aspects, and if you're living in a monastic situation, you're really studying these and deconstructing them and so forth and so on. In Zen, we tend not to do that so much, but all these ways are really valid. And so, yeah, they can get far more detailed, and they are. For instance, right speech. There's speaking the truth, what you understand to be the truth, and not erring into falsehoods. There's speaking kindly, saying words that are helpful, and all the different facets of right speech are there, and well worth paying attention to. Right action. Again, in ethics. And the foundation of right action is also just mindfulness. Whatever act we're engaged in, breathing and being present in right action. Right livelihood, again, ethics. It would be nice if whatever one does for their livelihood, if it was ethical. And I have the good fortune to be in that, and many things are, wherever it is. If you're checking out at a grocery store, a checker, or stocking the shelves, or fixing tires, or a nurse, the whole spectrum, an artist, working in an office, it all can be very ethical. If it isn't, then question what it is one is doing, and perhaps change that path. And there are specific lists that I won't go into about what not to be engaged in, depending if you're, a monastic or a particular tradition, as far as, creating weapons and so forth and so on and so on. So one could explore that in detail. We won't do that here. But another deep consideration. So ethics, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Next, so there's wisdom, right view, right intention, ethics, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Mindfulness, right effort, right awareness, right concentration. Right effort is grounded in right view and right intention. Right? So really these 8 are interrelated, and the interbeing of them, they're all interrelated, and they inform one another, and they're really a mandala. So it's not very linear. You start with right view and you end up, with right concentration. They are all informing one another in the sense of prajnaparamita, wisdom. The right effort is really grounded in right intention. If that's informing your effort, then your effort won't err and be unwholesome. So the wholesome and unwholesome are continuously informing all of these. So the seeds of the wholesome, the seeds of the unwholesome. What will we water? What will we not? What will we nurture? Right awareness. Right awareness is, again, being grounded in the present moment, breathing, being aware of the stream of thoughts coming and going. Frequently, we're dwelling in either the past or the future. Very common. Future, lots of anxiety. The past, lots of sorrow. Having said that, we do need to make plans for the future, of course, and we should. And we do learn from the past, studying history. However, the mind tends to really dart around frequently in the past and the future and create scenarios that don't exist. Right awareness, being present, breathing. Right concentration. Well, we do this throughout the day. Get grounded and touch that with Zazen. And again, I was sitting here and my mind was going here and there. Oh my goodness, tame that wild mind just by observing it. There's no big strain on it. You're aware that it's happening, and that's key right there. That you're aware of the stream of thoughts and dwelling in the past and the future. Right concentration. The famous ox herding paintings of Zen, where it's all about, being aware and taming the drifting mind. So this term, the abbot is teaching a class on the Genjo Koan by Dogen. Many of you, I'm sure, are participating in that. It's quite an interesting piece. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. Are there any questions or inspirations or insights that anyone would like to share? Please. Hi.
You mentioned a list of like livelihoods that would not be wholesome, and you didn't want to get into it. I'm just wondering, where would I look to see that kind of detail?
Yeah, you could look into that. There's lists of that. Mainly that's in the Theravadan or monastic cultures. It's very very strict. Not that that's a negative thing. That's just a particular way of being. And so you could look there into the Vinaya code. That's for the monks and nuns. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
you mentioned that the right way was not the opposite of the wrong way. Correct?
Oh, well, let's explore that.
Yeah, let's,
So you'd like me to detail that?
well, it's just so kind of fundamentalist. So yeah, I would like you to explore that. Yes.
Well, I would say in the terms of wholesome and unwholesome. Is it is your speech beneficial? Relative to right speech, is it beneficial to the particular situation, or is it harmful? Are one's actions in a particular situation beneficial or harmful? And of course, every situation is so nuanced that you'd have to be into that particular situation to specifically answer that. Yeah, most definitely.
Which are difficult to describe as right and wrong many times.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, we know that.
Doesn't solve the dilemma at all.
No, but it's really important. I mean, I think ultimately the human heart has a lot of wisdom. I'd say go with that.
Kogen. We've been started unpacking the word right a little bit in the Monday night circle last week. And one way that we have talked about it is that that right that's not opposed to wrong, kind of like we use words like great is not opposed to small, or
Yeah.
that is more about oriented toward liberation.
Mm-hmm.
Right meaning focused on liberation,
Yes.
which is a subtle difference in the ethical way. I mean, it is ethics and it is about wholesome and unwholesome, but that if we keep our orientation toward liberation, that all kind of becomes apparent.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you. I hope it does. I mean, it takes work. You can use language, and it's important, but there are, the specifics and the nuances. But often Buddhism refers to, oftentimes we come from a deluded place, and that's where we cause a lot of problems. And whereas the clarity, and that's more what right is referring to, the wisdom and clarity, the heart chakra, I would say, as another way of approaching that. And I think that's a good topic for discussing, like your group is, that we should be doing that rather than just saying right and wrong. Yeah, helpful. One more question? Anyone?
I can add to the unpacking the right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't put right in a binary with right and wrong. I put it more in a physical spiritual orientation with say we use that word right when we write a boat. So when we study ethics in our school, we study the precepts, and part of that is being upright. So if you think about rightness in terms of gravity or in orientation to life, then wrong doesn't play in so much. It's, oh, well, if I'm not upright in my path and my movements, what's pulling me off balance? What am I stuck to? What's knocking me off balance? And so it's a constant movement through life and space and we can't be stuck in an upright position either. We have to constantly be negotiating the movement. And it's in space and bringing it back to the beginning where we spoke about the earth, that that puts us in an orientation with the center of the earth, and gravity and the entire cosmos. So, if that helps, explore.
Yeah, thank you. It's better to be kind than it is to be right.